Best friend of 13 years demanded I choose between him and my new boyfriend after confessing his love, leaving me with no choice. I've known my best friend Kevin since I was 5 years old. Through all those years, he's been by my side as a constant, always the kind of friend anyone would be lucky to have. To me, Kevin is like a brother. I've never had any romantic interest in him. Our relationship has always been distinctly platonic. I was always careful to keep our interactions on the friends-only level, occasional hugs, but never anything more, because I really never wanted to blur those boundaries or confuse him. Back in high school, things got a bit complicated. Kevin confessed his feelings for me and asked if I wanted to be his girlfriend. I was 15, he was 16. Honestly, I had to tell him that I just didn't feel that way about him. I only saw him as a friend, and that wasn't ever going to change. After a somewhat awkward stretch, he seemed to move past it and we went back to being close friends. He even asked me to his senior prom, but I turned him down, not out of meanness, but because I didn't want to send the wrong message. He wound up going with someone else. Over the years, I made sure to be direct about our relationship. We're just friends, and that's the only thing I want from him. I'm really not the most emotional person, and dating has always been kind of a background thing in my life. But about 6 months ago, I met someone, Mark. The attraction hit me immediately. We connected, balanced each other out perfectly, and started dating just a month after meeting. Mark is my first truly serious boyfriend. He makes me happy, he's warm and understanding, and even though the relationship is still new, I can't help but feel excited for our future together. I'd never felt that spark before Mark came along, because of Kevin's history of getting jealous when I dated other guys, even in high school, which eventually made me stop mentioning boys around him. I was hesitant to introduce Mark to him. But I wanted them both in my life, and hoped that seeing me happy would help Kevin finally move on. I told Mark that Kevin had harbored feelings for me, but assured him that I only ever saw Kevin as a friend, and Mark trusted me. The first time they met, though, it was a disaster. I had gathered a group of friends, Kevin, Mark, myself, and a few others. From the moment Mark walked in, Kevin seemed to dislike him. Mark tried so hard to be friendly, trying to make conversation, but Kevin was cold and rude the whole evening. Even our mutual friends commented that Kevin was out of line. I'd hoped he'd offer Mark a chance, especially since Mark was making such an effort, but Kevin just wouldn't budge. Mark was genuinely upset, and I promised to talk to Kevin about the situation. I asked Kevin if he could make more of an effort, or at least be civil, and he promised, but it was just empty words. Whenever he'd asked me to hang out, Mark was never included. Things reached a head about a week ago. We were out bowling with a group, and Mark overheard Kevin saying some really rude things about him to another friend. Mark confronted Kevin, and the situation quickly escalated. No one threw punches, but I decided to leave with Mark not long after. Mark apologized for the confrontation, but I couldn't believe how ugly the entire scene had become. When I got home, I messaged Kevin, telling him how disappointed I was in the way he was treating Mark, and that if he didn't stop, I wouldn't be able to hang out with him anymore. Kevin responded by asking if we could meet up alone the next day to talk. So, I met him at this coffee place, and I'll never forget the way he looked at me. Hurt, betrayed, he said he couldn't believe I was picking Mark over him. He began ranting about how he's always been there for me, waiting for me to feel how he feels, and how I was just throwing that away for someone I'd only known for 6 months. And, finally, he said what I always suspected but dreaded hearing: he's been in love with me for years, and the idea of anyone else with me just drove him crazy. I stayed calm and reminded him, once again, that I've only ever seen him as a friend, just as I'd told him before. At that point, he exploded, accused me of being insensitive, accused me of parading Mark in front of him, called me shallow and selfish for refusing to give him a shot. According to him, I'd been leading him on all these years. I told him I was sorry for giving him the wrong idea, and if he felt lead on, that was never my intention, but I made it clear, he isn't going to change my mind. I'm with Mark, and even if I weren't, that wouldn't mean I'd end up with Kevin. That's when he said it: I had to choose, him or Mark. He stormed out of the coffee shop, angrier than I'd ever seen him. Kevin had always been such a sweet guy, but whenever Mark came up or even just was present, Kevin turned into someone I barely recognized. I've spent several days thinking about all this and I've realized, I can't give up my relationship with Mark. We may not have much history yet, but we're happy, we love each other, we said it about a month ago, and I'm not going to throw that away. I told Mark about Kevin's ultimatum, and it made him furious. He said I shouldn't have to choose between them. Kevin is being irrational. After our coffee shop meeting, Kevin sent one text: "You make up your mind yet?" That's all. 13 years of friendship. That's what's on the line and it hurts, but Kevin's never acted this out of control before. Still, I know deep in my heart that even if we stayed friends, he'd never be able to fully get over his feelings, and I'd only be giving him false hope. Worse, Kevin's behavior lately is so hostile I barely recognize him. I am choosing Mark. I have no doubts. Mark would never force me to choose, and Kevin's ultimatum is a cruelty I never thought he was capable of. But I have no clue how to say any of this to Kevin. I worry about him, and I don't want to hurt him more than I already have. He's angry, bitter, and I'm not even sure if it's safe to meet him in person again. How do you end a friendship that spanned your entire life? I feel terrible, especially knowing Mark is caught up in this drama through no fault of his own. This feels impossible. Update 1. There's something I hadn't gone into detail about before: my social life and friendships. I had mentioned that I'm not an emotional person, but I realize now that it's more accurate to say that I struggle to form emotional attachments to people and have a hard time interacting with others. My parents had a huge influence on that, though I won't delve into the details. For so long, Kevin was the only real friend I ever had. My social skills have improved a great deal over the past few years, especially since I started dating Mark. I've learned how to open up more, and I'm so much happier for it. But when I was younger, Kevin was my entire world, which is what made the decision to cut him from my life so excruciating. About 4 days after I first decided, I texted Kevin and asked him to meet me at the same coffee shop where we'd last talked. Honestly, the idea of facing him alone terrified me, so I brought Mark. Maybe it wasn't the best idea, and some people would say I should have just called or texted, but I needed to look Kevin in the eye and let him see how serious I was. Mark insisted on coming along, just in case the conversation escalated. He hid in a corner with a book, far enough away to give us privacy but close enough that he could intervene if it came to that. Before meeting Kevin, I reached out to several of our mutual friends and told them what was happening. Most of them were supportive, and some already had an inkling, thanks to Kevin. I only wanted to share my side so everyone knew where each of us was coming from. I never asked anyone to pick sides, but still, a couple of people decided I was being a bitch. Not that it bothers me, I've been called worse. Thankfully, most of my friends have welcomed Mark into their lives, and I'm grateful that they've been so understanding about everything. When Kevin finally arrived, I said what I had rehearsed over and over. I told him that I wasn't the one ending our friendship, he was, by making me choose between him and my relationship with Mark. I told him that a real friend would want me to be happy, and since I cared about Mark, he should support me instead of making me miserable. He fired back that a good friend wouldn't dismiss his feelings like I have or lead him on. I reminded him, again, that I told him early on how I felt, that I didn't see him romantically. It all turned into a drawn-out back and forth. I told him plainly that even if I wasn't with Mark, I wouldn't date him, and I thought we both needed space to reassess because our friendship was becoming toxic. I wished him happiness, truly. Kevin's response was to cause a small scene in the coffee shop before storming out, leaving a trail of insults behind him. He left too quickly for Mark to even get involved, but his behavior cemented for me that I was making the right call by ending things. Mark and I left soon after, and I haven't heard from Kevin since, though word has gotten back to me that he's painting me as some kind of villain to our mutual friends. I don't intend to reach out to him, and I'm avoiding any social gatherings where he'll be. I even went so far as to block him on social media for now. The truth is, I'm heartbroken to lose the friendship I had with Kevin. If someday he manages to work through his feelings, maybe we could reconnect, but I don't expect that to happen anytime soon, so I'm focusing on moving forward, especially with Mark. I apologize to Mark about the whole mess, but he's been incredible, patient, kind, everything I could hope for. I promised him I'd work on communicating more openly with him. Not long after, Mark had a family issue pop up back home. He asked me to go with him to Europe for a couple of months to help his family deal with it. At first, I hesitated, not wanting to intrude, but he was insistent, saying it would mean a lot to have me there to support him. So we're leaving this weekend. The situation isn't perfect, but in some way, I feel relieved that there will be an entire ocean between myself and Kevin. Maybe that distance will give us both the space we need to really move on. Update 2. After everything that happened, I received a handful of unpleasant messages. People called me all sorts of colorful names. Luckily, nothing really shocks me anymore. I've watched every single episode of Game of Thrones, so profane language and angry rants just roll right off me. I have to say, though, the kind messages were really heartening, and I appreciated every bit of kindness that found its way to me during this whole ordeal. Even if I couldn't reply to most, life has been non-stop these past few months. Things were wild after my last major fallout with Kevin, the ultimate nice guy disaster. Right after that, Mark and I took off for Germany and spent all of June and most of July there, wrapped up in his family's world and dealing with some things they needed to handle. I was nervous meeting them, since I tend to come off a little cold whenever I meet new people, but his parents welcomed me with such warmth. Our time together there brought me closer to Mark than I ever imagined it would, and by the end, I knew without a doubt that I wanted to be with him. Now, his parents want us back for the holidays, something I never expected to be excited about, but here we are. Back home, communication with my old circle nearly dropped off completely. I messaged with some friends here and there, but I had zero contact with Kevin. Totally ghosted. I didn't ask about him, nobody brought him up, and I made sure to avoid any event where I even suspected he'd show up. Honestly, most of my friends seemed to get the message, and I'm pretty sure he was steering as clear of me as I was of him. Over the past year, I had been planning to move to a new city for education and work, something fresh, something mine. With a little help from some friends in the area, my plans finally started taking shape. Mark and I talked about it for hours, days, and he decided to move with me. Since his family is back in Germany and he isn't tied down by anything here, it just fit. We found a cool apartment, Mark landed a couple of job interviews, and I've pretty much managed to line everything up on my end. In less than a week, we're setting out on this next chapter together, and I am beyond thrilled, for both of us. Just last weekend, a group of our friends threw us a goodbye party at our local favorite spot. Most of them knew about the Kevin mess, so I fully expected a drama-free night. I didn't realize they had also invited him. The second he walked in, my heart nearly leapt into my throat. He approached me, asking calmly if we could talk. Against my instincts, I agreed, but made sure to stay in the main party area. I wasn't about to go off alone with him. Then, standing among the noise and laughter of the party, Kevin apologized to me. He owned everything, all the insults, the badmouthing, the ultimatum, and his attitude toward Mark. He admitted to not really listening when I rejected him the first time. Going completely no contact, he explained, had been the right call. It helped him put everything in perspective. And then, truly, I'm not making this up, he said, I didn't realize I was being a nice guy. I forgave him. There weren't any dramatic tears or an audience for our reconciliation. I apologized too, for any mixed signals I might have given. It was never intentional. He assured me that after stepping back, he recognized that he'd ignored my feelings and should have respected my boundaries from the start. We agreed that while our friendship could survive, we'd never be best friends again. We'll be friendly, but life is going to put plenty of miles between us, which is honestly for the best. Kevin told me he's doing well and has even been on a couple of dates since we parted ways. He looks genuinely hopeful about the future, and I wish the best for him. I want to believe he's moved on from his nice guy phase and is aiming for a better attitude. Deep down, I know he wasn't always the human embodiment of Taylor Swift's "You Belong With Me." When we finished, Kevin went over to Mark. I still don't know exactly what was said, but Mark told me Kevin apologized to him as well. I don't expect them to be friends, but if they can share a room without drama, I'll chalk that up as a win. Some of our mutual friends came forward, too, apologizing for the names they called me and for taking Kevin's side while he was venting about me. I've forgiven them. There's really no use holding grudges when I'm about to start a whole new life with Mark and Kevin is moving on, too. I truly am incredibly lucky to have Mark by my side. He handled all of this with more grace and patience than I could have ever hoped for. From the very beginning, I made sure he knew everything, and I apologized to him for dragging him into such ridiculous drama. He assured me he was just relieved it was resolved and grateful I always kept him in the loop. If anyone out there is dealing with a Kevin, or even a Kevinette, I honestly hope they come around and things work out the way they should. And for anyone who sent me angry, hateful messages, I hope you take a look at yourself and realize how exhausting it must be to carry around so much anger for a stranger. Update 3. We made the move. New city, new apartment, new routine that felt like stepping into someone else's life for a second before realizing it was mine. Mark got the job he really wanted, which felt like winning a small, private lottery. I started my program and had that first day of school stomach flip I thought I'd outgrown. Everything was busy and bright and a little overwhelming in a good way. Then the elevator broke. It was a Tuesday, late, and I was hauling a bag of groceries that had decided to rip right as the doors were closing. Mark was with me, because he insists on carrying anything heavier than a pillow like he's auditioning for a chivalry documentary. We were halfway between floors when the elevator shuttered and stopped. The fluorescent light above us hummed like a mosquito. I pushed the alarm. Nothing. I laughed because my day had been ridiculous and this felt like the punchline. The intercom crackled, and a man's voice came through. Give us 10 minutes? Cool, I said to the grated speaker, like it could hear my sarcasm. We stood there, quiet, Mark squeezing my hand out of habit. The doors were just slightly misaligned, so when footsteps came down the hall, I could see a sliver of shoe, then a dark wash of shadow. And then the voice I hadn't heard in months said, "Wait. You're kidding. Kevin." I almost dropped the remaining tomatoes. Mark squeezed my hand harder. I stared at the strip of hallway like I could force it to be someone else. He crouched to our eye level, a slice of his face visible through the gap. "Is that you? Why are you here?" It came out more bewildered than anything. "I was going to leave a box at your door. I rang the wrong apartment first and now I'm..." "Never mind. Are you okay?" "We're fine," Mark called, steady as ever. The building guy fussed with something at the end of the hall, muttering. Kevin shifted, and I saw the edge of a torn cardboard box at his feet with my name on it, in his messy handwriting. The intercom squawked again. 5 more minutes. I leaned back against the bar and exhaled slowly. If the universe was going to trap me in a bottle episode, it picked a good day. Kevin said, quieter, "Can I talk while we wait?" I looked at Mark. He gave me that look that says you're safe, I'm here, and nodded. "Okay," I said. He slid the box aside. "I found a bunch of your stuff in my parents' garage when I was home. The bracelet from 5th grade. The Polaroids. Your stupid hair ribbon you made me hold for like a year," I snorted despite myself. "It was a very important ribbon." "I know." His voice hit that soft register I remembered from before everything went sideways. "I wanted to mail it to you but it felt better to hand it over. I'm in town for a couple days. My sister's at a conference. I wasn't going to bother you, I swear. I wanted to return what was yours." The elevator groaned like it agreed. He kept going. "I started therapy. I know I don't get a prize for saying that, but it's helping. I've been walking around like a guy who thinks he's the only one with a heart. I wasn't owed anything from you. That took longer to sink in than it should have. I'm sorry I made you the bad guy in a story where I was just hurt and didn't want to be. Mark's thumb traced circles on my wrist. I could feel my shoulders loosening, the way you unclench before you notice you were tense. I appreciate that, I said. He shifted again, the box sliding with a scratch. Also, I wanted to say this to Mark, too. I was an ass. You didn't do anything to deserve that. I thought if I made you look small, I could keep feeling big. It was gross. Mark stepped closer to the door. Thanks, man, he said simply. I accept your apology. Somebody banged the outer door with the force of someone who wanted to feel useful. Almost got it. The building guy shouted. And I'm seeing someone, Kevin said, like it was a confession and also a relief. Her name's Maya, she knows everything. In the normal, not obsessed way. She's outside in an Uber because I told her I'd be 10 minutes and I think I've been a liar for 20. Despite myself, I laughed. Mark laughed. The elevator jerked and the doors lined up, then slid open like a movie reveal. Kevin stood there with the box, hair a little longer, a little scruffier, like time had sanded him down in ways that suited him. We looked at each other without that electric wire between us. He handed me the box. On top was the bracelet with the faded bead spelling my name, tied back together at least twice. I'll take that, I said, and slipped it onto my wrist like muscle memory. He blew out a breath. I'm not asking to be in your life again in any big way. I just wanted to return the things and not be the guy I was. That's it. That's enough, I said. We walked out together. Maya existed exactly as described, pretty, sharp-eyed, a little amused. She stepped out of the car and stuck her hand out to me. Hi. I've heard you're very into ribbons. I barked out a laugh. Absolutely untrue. I'm completely indifferent to ribbons. Tragic, she deadpanned, then shook Mark's hand, then Kevin's shoulder like they'd known each other longer than they had. It wasn't awkward. That felt like a magic trick. It could have ended there, tidy as a bow, but life never leaves me with just one scene. 2 days later, Mark got an email at midnight and sat up so fast he knocked the laptop cord out of the wall. He got a permanent offer in Germany, better pay, a team he actually wants to work with, the kind of thing he'd been careful not to name out loud in case he jinxed it. He looked at me like someone who wasn't sure if the floor was going to hold. I want this, he said. I want it with you, but I want it either way. That's me being honest. I don't want to push you. That younger version of me, the one who kept everything half arm's length because caring felt dangerous, would have panicked. Instead, I felt that same expanding lung feeling I had when the elevator doors opened. Space, where there used to be a wall. Let's go, I said. Not forever if it's not right. But let's go. Mark smiled in a way that made his eyes almost close. Okay, he said. Okay. And because the universe apparently loves a theme, the next morning I found a small envelope in the box Kevin had returned, stuck between old photos. It wasn't dramatic, just a print of the two of us at 7, faces sticky with popsicles, and on the back, in my handwriting, a list of things I wanted to do when we were big. I'd put learn German right under get a cat. My 7-year-old self had an agenda. I sent Kevin a picture of it with a simple, thanks, and he replied, for what it's worth, you'll look good in a scarf. We booked tickets for January. Maya sent me the name of a cafe in Berlin she loved when she studied there. Mark's parents screamed in German over the phone in a way that somehow sounded like joy. I packed the bracelet. I stroked a cat at the shelter across the street that I'm 99% sure we're going to bring home and name something ridiculous. Update 4. Berlin is winter and breath. Everyone is wrapped in wool and purpose. I stepped off the plane and the air bit my cheeks like it was reminding me I have a face. Mark's parents met us with scarves and Tupperware and so much talking that I didn't have to say anything except hello and Danke and yes, I will take another cookie. My bracelet felt cold against my wrist in a way that made me weirdly happy. The first thing we did wasn't romantic. It was paperwork. Appointments here are like rare birds, you don't chase them, you wait very still and hope one lands on your hand. Mark set an alarm for 2 a.m. to refresh a government website, and by some kind of digital witchcraft, a slot popped up. We high-fived in the dark like burglars who'd just stolen a time slot. We adopted a cat on a day it snowed sideways. He was all elbows and complaint, orange with one ear that looked like it had lost an argument with a stapler. I named him Spatzel because he draped over my arm like noodles. He tolerates Mark and loves me in the way cats love ownership, with the benevolence of a tiny emperor. Spatzel made his debut at the Burger Ramp because we couldn't leave him that long yet. He yowled like a trumpet solo every time the ticket numbers changed. When it was finally our turn, I stood up too fast, knocked my bag into the carrier door, and the latch clicked. He did one of those liquid escapes that defies physics and sprinted under a row of coats like a furry orange roomer. A woman in a puffered jacket dropped to her knees and made coaxing sounds in German that I didn't understand but felt soothing even to me. Mark went around the other side and crouched, palms out, like he was talking someone off a ledge. The clerk leaned over the counter and said, deadpan, Die Katze braucht keinen Termin, which I later learned meant the cat doesn't need an appointment. We laughed. It broke the spell. Spatzel stalked back into his carrier with the offended grace of someone who'd been inconvenienced by our panic and resented that we'd seen him run. I'm learning German the way you learn to swim when you've already waded out too deep. One of Mark's mom's friends runs a beginner class at a community center that smells like coffee and chalk dust. I sit with a notebook and copy strange umlauts like I'm drawing tiny hats. I like the way my mouth has to work for it. I like the small victories, ordering bread without pointing, understanding jokes the second time they're told. It feels like my 7-year-old self left me a breadcrumb trail and I finally decided to follow it. Maya's cafe exists exactly the way she described it: long wooden tables, a chalkboard menu smudged by the day, a barista with a tattoo of a tiny fox peeking over her sleeve. I sent Maya a picture of my cappuccino because I'm basic and because she asked me to. She replied 10 minutes later that they were in town next weekend and did we want to meet there. So we did, on purpose, in daylight, with coffee that tasted like a decision I didn't regret. Kevin was different the way people are different when they've been alone with themselves for a while and decided to be kind. He hugged me like a friend and complimented Mark's terrible hat. Maya made me try her cake and told me where to find cheap plants. We talked about nothing and everything: work, weather, the way the trains here are so quiet you hear your thoughts louder. When they left, Kevin squeezed my shoulder and said, "I'm happy for you," and there wasn't a tension wire hidden under it. It landed and sat there and didn't sting. Homesickness shows up when the light goes weird at 4 in the afternoon and my phone pings in a language that's mine. It's a soft ache, not a sharp one. On those evenings, I take Spatzel to the window and watch the streetlights come on and the cyclists glide by like they've rehearsed it. Mark comes home smelling like the cold and new coffee machines and presses his face to my neck like that's his grounding cord. We argue about nothing sometimes: why he folds towels like he's fighting them, why I leave my shoes facing the door like I'm ready to sprint, and then we stand on opposite sides of the kitchen island and look at each other until one of us breaks, which is usually me, which still surprises me in a good way. The only time I really came apart was at a bank, which I think is universal. The teller spoke quickly, and I caught every third word and none of the context. Mark tried to help, and I could feel the heat rise in my chest, a familiar fizz. Old me would have shut down, gone smooth and hard and unreachable. Instead, I excused myself to the hallway with the potted plant that had seen everything. I counted slowly. I looked at my bracelet. I went back and said, in German that moved like a stack of boxes, "Ich lerne noch. Langsam, bit. I am still learning. Slowly, please." The teller switched to English with a smile that made me wonder how many times she'd been waiting to be asked nicely. It was easy after that. Not because the words were easier, but because I remembered I could ask. On a Sunday, I called my mother and told her about the snow that turned the canals into stories. She listened without interrupting, which is not our usual sport. When I finished, she said, "Your German sounds good," which was a lie and also the exact right thing. I realized I wasn't braced like a door. I was just standing there. That was new. We took the train out to see Mark's grandparents in a village that looked like a postcard someone had written on but never sent. His grandmother put an extra piece of cake on my plate every time I looked away. His grandfather asked me about my family and then told me stories so long they looped around to being about me somehow. When we left, I had a knitted hat and advice about onions and a feeling like I belonged to something that had existed before me and would exist after me, and I was part of that string now. The last thing: a message from Kevin, late, a photo of Maya asleep on his shoulder on a bus, her mouth slightly open, captioned, "This is my favorite person to look at." I stared at it for a long time, not because of the picture, but because of that sentence. It didn't have a hook in it. It just sat there, warm. I sent back a picture of Spatzel upside down on the radiator with a paw over his face and wrote, "Same." He sent a heart and nothing else. Clean. Update 5. Spring swung open like someone cracked a window in a stuffy room. Berlin smelled like wet stone and lilacs, and every dog wore a bandana like it had been to a meeting about it. Spatzel found a sunspot on the parquet and turned into liquid on it, one paw over his eyes like he was shielding his dignity. The first weird thing was a letter with more stamps than a passport. It had my name and Mark's name and a lot of German that looked polite and urgent at the same time. I caught Unterlegen and Aya and my brain did a backflip. Documents. Marriage. I handed it to Mark like it might hiss. He read it 3 times and went very still in that way he does when he's thinking so hard it rearranges the air. "They need additional paperwork," he said. "Someone at HR checked the wrong box. It makes it look like you're my spouse." The word hit the wall and slid down slowly. Old me would have frozen, then made a joke that tasted like tin. New me breathed and felt the ground. "Okay," I said. We fixed the box, which is how we ended up at the Ausländerbehörde at dawn with a folder that could bench press. The waiting room looked like a story about patience. People dozed upright. A toddler ate a cracker like it had wronged him. Spatzel was banned this time and yowled at the door like a protest. When our number flickered, we stood so fast I knocked my knee on the chair. The woman behind the desk had red lipstick and the kind of calm that comes from being the person everyone needs something from. Mark explained. I added my careful German. "Wir sind nicht verheiratet." "Noch nicht," I said, then flushed immediately because my mouth had betrayed me. "Not yet." She didn't react, just typed with sharp little clacks and said, "Die Firma soll das korrigieren." Kinda Sorge, and stamped something like a blessing. We got outside and laughed in a way that sounded like oxygen. Mark put his forehead to mine. "I didn't hate hearing you say that," he said. He looked a little wrecked and a lot soft. I didn't either, but I also didn't want to make everything into a timeline with pitfalls in it. We walked home and bought strawberries and ate them standing at the counter until our fingers looked like we'd killed a small berry king. The second weird thing was my mother texting, Gate B07, and a picture of a suitcase wrapped in plastic like a fruit. No lead up, no can I come, just an airport and the implication of landing on my life. I met her with a scarf and coffee and my heart doing the mountain bike thing. She looked smaller, or maybe the ceiling was higher here. She hugged me like someone trying to remember choreography. On the train, she stared out the window and said, "It's cleaner than I thought," which is her version of a compliment. I pointed out buildings like I had built them. Having my mother in our apartment felt like putting a familiar painting in a different room. She touched the windows. She made a face at the European washing machine, which looks like a robot that refuses to explain itself. Spatzel flicked an ear at her and then decided to like her immediately, because cats love difficult women. The first night, Mark came home and she stood up like she was at attention. He kissed her cheek with ease you can't fake. She watched him the way she watched weather when I was a kid, suspicious and hopeful. We did the museum thing. We did the market thing. She critiqued my fruit choices like there was a test. Outside the Turkish market, amid spice and fabric and people moving like water, she said, "I didn't raise you to move across the world for a man." It hit like a small slap. I looked at her and saw the girl she had once been, told to be useful and quiet and sturdy like a piece of furniture. "You didn't," I said. "I moved for me." He just fit in the carry-on. My mouth went bold before I could edit it. We stood there, two women on a bridge with oranges in a tote bag, and didn't blink. Then she asked, carefully, what Spatzel meant. I told her, and she rolled the word in her mouth like it might crack a tooth. "Noodles," she said finally, and snorted. It wasn't a truce, exactly, but the air loosened a fraction. Later, on our couch, she asked me about my program and listened like a person. When she went to bed, she put her hand on my wrist where the bracelet sits and said, "You always did like to keep your promises to yourself." It was the kind of sentence that threads a needle. The third weird thing was Kevin texting, "Can you keep a secret and also carry a small box and lie convincingly for 20 minutes? I said yes because apparently, I'm an adult with a cat and an immigration file who still wants to carry a small box for a friend. He and Maya were back in Berlin for a weekend. He looked good in that way that comes from sleep and decisions. He met me outside the cafe with a paper bag and eyes like he'd hidden a puppy and was dying to tell someone. Inside was a ring and a velvet cube and two pastries that looked like they knew their worth. "I'm going to ask her here," he said, and his voice shook. The barista with the fox tattoo nodded like she'd been briefed by the CIA. We hid the ring under a whipped cream mountain that made me nervous and euphoric. Maya came in with a book tucked under her arm and an expression like she could spot nonsense from orbit. Kevin did one of those speeches that aren't speeches. He talked about missing buses to keep walking. He said favorite person to look at, and I felt something in my chest rearrange in a good way. He looked at me once, quickly, not for permission, just for steady, and I sent it back like a lighthouse. Maya said yes like she was saying her own name out loud after a long time. The cafe clapped in that awkward, sweet way strangers clap for love. Kevin cried without pretending he wasn't. We ate the ring cake with forks because there are no rules in moments like that. Mark, who had slipped in, squeezed my waist and cried very attractively. After, Kevin hugged me with both arms and no history in the grip. "Thank you," he said. I told him I hadn't done anything, which wasn't true. Sometimes not being the story is its own role. Maya squeezed my hand hard enough to crack a knuckle and said, "You have good taste in men and pastries," and I said, "I'm trying very hard," and she laughed and then took a picture of me with cream on my lip because she is the kind of person who documents joy. On the way home, Mark and I walked like we had a secret we weren't keeping. He said, "Do you ever think about the thing?" With his whole body tense and a question mark. I knew what he meant without him saying it. "Yes," I said, and it didn't feel like an alarm. "I think about a plant we don't kill. I think about a slightly bigger table. I think about Spatzel tolerating a bow tie." He exhaled, and it steamed in the air like tea. "Me too," he said. "All of it. Slowly, please." We said it at the same time and then laughed because we are both the same kind of ridiculous. 2 days later, I passed a German exam that had haunted me like a small bureaucratic ghost. I walked out into the sun with a certificate that looked more important than it was and I wanted to show 7-year-old me. I texted Kevin a picture of it and he sent back a video of Maya trying on rings with sunglasses on indoors like a criminal. He captioned it, "She said yes twice," and I had to sit down on a curb. My mother left after a week with a jar of pickles she didn't buy and a softness around her mouth I hadn't seen since I was small. At the airport, she put both hands on my face like she was trying to memorize it. "You seem happy," she said, and it sounded like confession and blessing at once. "I am," I said. She nodded once, like she had filed it, and then ruined it slightly by telling me to wear a hat. I wore the hat. I sent her a picture of Spatzel in a bow tie, and she replied, "He looks smug," which, fair. That night, Mark came home with a plant we might not kill. We put it on the windowsill where the light is kind and named it something stupid. The city hummed outside like a neighbor with a good stereo. My bracelet slipped down my wrist when I reached for his hand. It's silly, beads and old thread, but it feels like a knot I chose and keep choosing. We stood there being very boring and very alive. It felt like the most interesting thing I've ever done.